By 1775, the American colony stood at the edge of a historic transformation. What began as protest had escalated into defiance. British authority, once unquestioned, now faced open resistance across the Atlantic. Still, many colonists held on to the hope that peace might yet prevail. Letters were sent, petitions signed, and diplomacy attempted. But Britain's response would leave little room for compromise. The road to war had no more exits. The empire was tightening its grip hand. The colonies were preparing to break free. The Olive Branch Petition in a final attempt to avoid full-scale war. The Second Continental Congress sent the Olive Branch Petition to King George III, drafted by moderate delegates like John Dickinson. The petition expressed loyalty to the Crown and pleaded for a peaceful resolution. The colonists asked the king to intervene, repeal oppressive laws, and restore the former harmony between Britain and the colonies. But the king refused to even read it. Instead, in August 1775, he declared the colonies to be in open rebellion. All who opposed royal authority would be treated as traitors, a crime punishable by death. This was a turning point. Many colonists who had hoped for reconciliation realized that independence might be the only path forward. The battles of Lexington and Concord, even before the Olive Branch Petition was written. The first shots of the American Revolution had already been fired. On the night of April 18, 1775, British troops marched from Boston toward Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts, to seize a hidden cache of colonial weapons and arrest Patriot leaders. But colonial spies, including Paul Revere, warned the countryside. The Minutemen colonial militias, trained to be ready on a moment's notice, prepared to resist. At dawn, British troops met a small force of militiamen in Lexington. A shot rang out. No one knows who fired first, but the skirmish began. 8 colonists were killed. The British pressed on to Concord, where they met heavier resistance. As the Redcoats retreated to Boston, colonial militias ambushed them along the way, inflicting heavy losses. This day would become known as the shot heard round the world. The Siege of Boston after Lexington and Concord. Thousands of colonial militiamen surrounded Boston, where British troops had taken shelter. In June 1775, the fighting escalated at the Battle of Bunker Hill, actually fought mostly on Breed's Hill. The colonists dug in on high ground, inflicted heavy casualties on the advancing British. Though the British technically won the battle, they lost over 1,000 men, double the colonial casualties. The battle proved that the American militias could stand up to the world's most powerful army. Meanwhile, George Washington, recently appointed commander of the Continental Army, arrived in Massachusetts to take charge, building an army from scratch. When George Washington took command, he inherited an untrained, poorly equipped, and loosely organized force. The soldiers had little discipline, few supplies, and no experience fighting a full-scale war. But Washington brought order, focus, and a commanding presence. He introduced strict training, enforced military discipline, and worked tirelessly to unify the troops. The Continental Congress struggled to fund the army. There was no national government or currency, just individual colonies with their own resources and interests. Yet through determination and sacrifice, an American army slowly began to take shape. Ideas become action. The case for independence by the end of 1775. More colonists were convinced that peaceful resolution was no longer possible. The British rejection of the Olive Branch Petition and the bloody battles in Massachusetts had hardened public opinion. Then, in January 1776, came a literary bombshell, Common Sense by Thomas Paine, written in plain language for ordinary people. The pamphlet made a bold and persuasive argument for independence. Paine attacked monarchy, criticized King George directly, and painted a future of freedom and self-government for America. The cause of America is in a great measure the cause of all mankind, Paine wrote. The effect was electric. Suddenly, talk of independence shifted from fringe discussion to mainstream conviction. British reinforcements and American response. Meanwhile, Britain was not sitting idle. It began sending thousands of additional troops to North America, along with German mercenaries known as Hessians. These moves shocked many colonists. Using foreign soldiers to suppress British subjects was seen as a betrayal and deepened anti-British sentiment. To counter British strength, the Continental Congress ramped up its efforts. New militias were formed across the colonies. Secret negotiations began with France and Spain, seeking foreign allies. American ships began attacking British supply vessels. Patriot leaders in towns and cities urged citizens to prepare for a long and difficult fight. Local revolutions and the collapse of royal authority, even before a national declaration. Many individual colonies began to act independently. Virginia removed its royal governor and formed a provisional government. Massachusetts declared its own constitution. North Carolina issued the Halifax Resolves, officially calling for independence, the first colony to do so. Throughout the colonies, loyalists, those who remained faithful to Britain, were often forced into silence or exile. Tarring and feathering, property seizures, and public shaming were not uncommon. The revolutionary movement was not without conflict or contradiction. Yet momentum was building, and the call for unity and independence was louder than ever. The path to a declaration. By May and June of 1776, the Second Continental Congress was no longer debating if independence would happen, but how and when. On June 7th, Delegate Richard Henry Lee of Virginia introduced a resolution that these united colonies are perfected and of right ought to be free and independent states. A committee was formed to draft a formal declaration. The task of writing the first draft was given to a young but brilliant Virginian, Thomas Jefferson. Over the next few weeks, Jefferson, working with John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston, crafted a document that would define not only a war, but a nation. Global stakes and foreign eyes across the Atlantic. The rest of the world watched closely. European rivals like France and Spain, still stinging from losses to Britain in earlier wars, hoped the American colonies might succeed. A successful revolution could weaken Britain and open new trade relationships. But foreign powers needed to see that the colonies were serious and united. A clear declaration of independence was essential, not just for American morale, but for global diplomacy. The pressure was mounting. The armies were marching, and the colonies were ready to commit. The next chapter of the American story would be written not with parchment and protest, but with a declaration that shook the world.